welcome back to the Applied Leadership Podcast. I'm Brandon. This is my partner, Blayne. And in this show, we are going to address a question that we get an awful lot. And the question is, what do I do with high performers who are frankly disruptive? Disruptive to the team, disruptive maybe interpersonally. We tend to have a lot of this come through sales divisions. We do a lot of work with sales leaders all over the United States. This tends to be one that comes up often. You know, I've got that person that's at the top of the stack rankings. They're crushing their number and they're a jerk, or they're just super disruptive and toxic, you know, with the organization, with the team. And I don't know what to do with it because they're performing in one angle. And yet I feel like it's creating an unhealthy precedent because, as we all know, your culture is what you will allow. And so I'll just drop that little nugget at the beginning here. But Blayne, I want to give it over to you to get us popping on this one. What do you think? You know, how do you address that? And what are some thoughts and some experiences that have led you to how you approach that?
Well, as you know, Brandon, I have some pretty strong feelings on this one, so I'm going to do my best not to come out too hot here and make this a 3-minute podcast, because I do have some fairly strong feelings on this, because I do have, you know, a significant amount of experience with situations like these, whether it be a peer of mine or someone who I'm leading or someone who sits above me in the organization. This is something that's probably not foreign to anybody who's listening or watching this right now. Maybe just to kind of put the bottom line up front for me, I think this is the kind of thing that has to be addressed. I think there's absolutely no room to have anybody in the organization who could potentially be malignant. You know, if they've got a bad attitude, they're setting bad precedent or a bad example, it has to be addressed. And that's particularly true if you've got people who are high performers, because what can happen very quickly is that it sort of creates a paradigm where, hey, if my numbers are good enough or my performance is good enough, it gives me license to behave however I like, or be late to meetings, or not do my share of team-oriented tasks, or you name it. And that absolutely cannot work. I've seen it many, many times. And while you may be able to kind of ride the lightning for a year or 2 or 3 years and kind of get away with it, it will absolutely come back to bite you as a leader. It will for sure be detrimental to the organization. And whatever you think you're giving up, potentially giving up, by leaning into the discomfort or kind of confronting a person who's not kind of playing as a team player, it's going to cost you manyfold on the back end. So I feel pretty strongly about it, just to kind of lay my feelings out there to begin with. And I think there's lots of ways, lots of healthy ways and productive ways in which we as leaders can go about approaching these things. You know, I can't guarantee that every time it's going to go exactly the way you hope. But I would encourage everybody out there to believe that if you can approach it with a certain level of confidence and with the right intentions in mind, and you know, with everybody's sort of perspective being included, including the person you're having a problem with, you can often get good results out of this. And it's not going to likely result in kind of the nuclear explosion that you might be worried about, whether it's, you know, cratering your business by losing all your best customers, or that person creating a big scene and walking out in a huff. While those things are possible, I don't think they're the most likely outcomes if you can approach this with a level head and get to it sooner than later. So I'll put that out there, and I'll kick it back over to you maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like we talk about all the time. Your culture is going to be what you will allow, the behaviors that you will allow to happen. And we see this all the time in organizations that we have worked within and in organizations that we get a chance to work with. And I guess I would take that thought and expand upon it and just address, like, so what? So what's the problem? So what's the problem if, you know, Billy's a jerk? I'm just making up a name.
Sorry,
Billy. Yeah, I know. It's just like any Billy that you ever knew was a jerk, right? No, that's not true. I'm just kidding.
It's getting worse.
I know. I should just stop right now. You know, Billy's a real jerk. And what's the problem if Billy's hitting his number? He's smashing it out of the park, right? Well, I would submit that first and foremost, the problem is that you're enabling an environment in which disunity and disruption is allowed. And I think this can be particularly difficult when you're in an environment such as a sales team, and that's just one of many, where you are rewarded for your individual efforts and your individual contributions and your individual scores at the end of the day, right? That's how your commission is based in most situations, in sales teams. And I'm sure there's parallels across all industries, whether it be engineering or, I don't know, name it, right? I'm sure that there are plenty of parallels out there. Finance, all of these things.
Absolutely.
And that can be really hard, right? Because you want those people to get after it and really try and exceed their goals, but not at the expense of others. And I think that that's where it really comes down to, for me, having been a sales leader, having had, folks who were I wanted to see all of them compete. I wanted to see them all do well, but not at the expense of others, but not at the expense of the team goals, not at the expense of the team culture, not at the expense of the team unity. And now I'm going to throw my bias on the table and say that I for the most part, have no tolerance for this kind of disruption. And it does have to be addressed because there's more going on than 1 year, one performance goal, one objective. We have to look at success by, you extend the time horizon of success. Yeah, that's right. And we're not trying to win a championship. We're trying to stack a dynasty here. We're talking about stacking rings. We want to win for the long haul. And anytime that kind of disruption is allowed to persist, just like you said, Blayne, it will only last for a very short amount of time. That the gains you will yield the gains from that. And you're going to end up having to deal with the outcomes or the negative consequences in the long term. So again, you could have a really great year. You might be lucky and have 2 great years. What are you going to do when you hit year 3, 4, or 5? That's when you're really going to feel the pain. And I will tell you that one thing I know both you and I have seen on teams, and you mentioned it already with high performers, is that, look, other high performers on the team, they're not going to put up with that, because high performers don't want to be on a team like that. They want to be on a team where, people are working, they're endeavoring in the same direction for a goal. And that doesn't mean that, one person can't be the person on stage or beat out or be at 137% to goal at the end of the year, while another person has 136% to goal. Because I will tell you that a true high-performing team, a true dynasty that knits together all those championships, you need to have those people on that team where you've got multiple horses running hard and really exceeding their goals if you truly want to win at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think sports is a great place to look at this. Let's maybe shift a little if we can and start talking about what do you do about it. But I do think before we get there, there's at least one more thing I want to kind of mention that's at play, which is kind of influence or maybe soft power. There are people, if they're high performers, that even if they don't have a rank or a title or a position in the organization, if they're consistently performing at a high level, or if they're just known to be particularly sharp or smart, they can have influence that far exceeds whatever position they sit in the organization. And we've seen so many examples of this in the world of sports where, maybe on a basketball team, you bring in one player who's a rock star, but is totally disruptive in the locker room for the team. That team may have a good season, or maybe 2, as Brandon said, because there's only 5 people on the floor in a basketball team, and that can have an outsized impact. But it still ends up being detrimental in the long term. And I think in places like the NFL, you see less of this because they've got a 54-man roster, and you get, one person who's disruptive will get kind of excised much more quickly. It's difficult for one person to make that outsized impact. So that's one way to kind of think about it. And what I've seen the best coaches do in the world of sports, and something that I used to always try to do when I was in the military, is I would immediately try to assess my high performers. Where in this, squad, platoon, company, where on this team are the people who people just naturally look to or gravitate toward? Who are the folks who tend to be the most charismatic, the sharpest, the most naturally gifted and high performing? Where are these people in my team? And how do I get in touch with them and make a connection and have a relationship with them as soon as possible? And I can tell you countless times in my personal career, I've kind of figured out who these people are as early as I can. Yep. And often because of their talent or because of their accomplishments, they take some liberties. And I try to get to them as quickly as I can. And I try to get my arm on their shoulder and say, hey, it's clear to me that you're very good at what you do. It's clear to me that your contribution is incredibly important to the success of our team. And here's what you need to know. I need you. Like, we're not going to be as successful as we could be without you. And so I need you to be on board for the big win. I need you and I to be on the same page. I want to work with you because as you go, likely the rest of the team is going to go.
We go.
And so, exactly. And so sometimes just giving them that acknowledgement, that recognition, it seems counterintuitive because if you feel like they're behaving like a little bit of a jerk or a prima donna, the last thing you want to do is kind of, pad their ego. But sometimes the best thing to do is just go right up to them and say, hey, look, you're awesome at this. And everyone knows you're awesome at it. And they're gonna follow your lead. And for us to be a great team, deep into the future, these are the things that we have to commit to. And if you and I can be on the same page and you can commit to those things, your ability to lead is only going to increase and our success as a team is only going to increase. And so is that something you and I can get on the same page about? And I don't think I can think of a single example where that didn't go well. I'm sure there are some where it might, but that tends to always go well. So that's my go-to approach is spot it early, get right in their kitchen and let them know, hey, you're awesome. And I want to be on the same page as you and we're going to work together on this.
Yeah. There's two things that makes me think of, one on the academic side and one on more of the colloquial side that I want to point out here. First of all, on the academic side, these two social scientists, French and Raven, did some really groundbreaking work on loci of power or influence, if you want to call it that. And it's acknowledging that there are far more loci of influence that are going on in an organization than just the formal base. So, which is one of them. You have the formal authority. You're the director of the team. Great job. You have that formal authority. We all have seen environments where the holder of the formal authority is put in a lesser position based on other loci of power or authority that are being deployed within that team. Those loci might be expert influence. Think about that person who they just have it. They're an expert at what they do. It could be intellectual power. It could be emotional power. It could be physical power. That is, such a person that is so physically dominating by their presence. They identified all these different loci of power, and I'm not going to sit here and like hip fire all of their work that they have done over years in 2 minutes. But the point is, it's valuable to understand and identify those different loci of power that are operating within your team. And then the second thing, which is a little bit more colloquial, is something that we talk about all the time, which is identify the bull in the room. Who's the bull in the room? Who's really holding the power here? And it's often those folks that are the ones, as you have stated rightly, that you can get up there, put your hand on their shoulder. You got to earn it, right? Especially if you're kind of new, you got to make sure that you're walking the walk or walking the talk, and you got to be consistent. But be able to put your hand on your shoulder and say, hey, listen, you're obviously great at what you do. And I don't know if you know this, but everybody is always watching what you do. You're the person that people are looking at. And you'd be amazed how many times you say that to somebody and they don't actually know that. They're not actually aware of the influence that they are exerting upon a team. And so this is where it's so important to actually have that difficult conversation and engage with that person, because you're doing them a service and you're doing the team a service, and you're not ignoring it and acting like it's not happening. You're not feeding into it and patting or pumping their ego anymore, whether they know that they're kind of operating out of that or not. But it's just so important to actually have that conversation. And this is something that, again, we have addressed this many times with the leaders that we get the chance to work with, is that look, this is where we need to look at folks as people. Like, people are not problems, people are people, problems are problems. Let's address the people and then address the problem that we're talking about. And I think that this is where it's helpful to kind of look at the disruption and maybe disaggregate it between what is actually the problem. And that's something that we've thought an awful lot about and we've worked through when we think about disruptions. Is it a disruption of proficiency, or is it a disruption of posture prospectively? Is it how somebody is showing up to the table, or is it quite possible that there's a lack of proficiency here, or there's a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge, a lack of training, whatever. But if we can start by looking at the disruption as a disruption, and we can look at people as a people and the problem as the problem, we can start to disaggregate and then maybe deal with it, which is, I know, what you want to get to next.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Like, we think of people as being like the problem, but as you say, they're a person. The problem is the problem, and I think that's a great place to start, because there are going to be times where a person is not a good fit for the team, or they're not going to get on board for the big win, and we've got to make the hard decision to figure out a way to move them off the team. I think I want to be clear, that is absolutely something that we have to do sometimes as leaders. Is we're going to have to remove people that are not a good fit for the team, because regardless of their high performance, it's going to erode the team, and it's going to keep others down rather than lifting others up. So that is something we will have to do from time to time.
Yep.
But I like this idea of first really getting as clear as we can on what is the actual problem, or what is the actual disruption, because at least my experience has taught me that I don't know as much about what's going on as I think I do. I'm quick to see someone doing something or behaving a certain way, and boy, do I think I'm smart. And I'm like, that person's just this kind of person, and this is the thing they got going on, and they're doing
I'm assigning motive.
Dude, I do it all the time. I think I'm so good at it. And then I have to check myself, or have someone check me, and spend a little more time and say, what really is going on here? In what circumstances is this problematic? Are there any patterns? And more times than not, if you can look at the actual disruption or the problem, you can figure this out, and you can say, this person, though they're very high performing or seem very confident on the outside, maybe there's actually a bit of an insecurity or a deficiency here that they're kind of trying to cover up, or they're trying to, rebalance somehow. Or, maybe there's something going on, like you're the new guy or the new gal that's in the leadership seat, and before you, there was nobody for a while. And so that person was having to shoulder their job plus be kind of the de facto leader of the team. And now you're here and you've displaced some of their authority, right? Or maybe some of the new things that are going on in the organization are running counter to things that they helped to put in place before. And so maybe they have some misgivings about this, or they feel a little off put by the fact that some of these things are happening. And just by having the conversation, by leaning into it and saying, hey, I can't help but notice you're really sharp. And as far as I can tell, you're very good at what you do here, yet there seems to be some misalignment here somewhere. You seem a little unhappy. You seem like you're not really eager to kind of join on for the big win here, or there seems to be some disruption between you and your coworkers. What's up? Like, how can I help? Let's talk about this. And you might be surprised at what comes out in a sincere, extension of the hand, or the olive branch, if you will. I mean, this happens all the time, even in our homes, right? I've known my wife a long time. I feel like I know her really well. Something will happen or not happen around our house, and I'll be like, well, she this and that, and she's thinking that, and she probably thinks that I'm this. And like, all I really need to do there is say, hey, feels like something's up. What's going on? What do I need to know? How can I help? And then you kind of get what's really going on behind the story. And then you can address the actual issue rather than, assigning too much to any individual person.
Yeah, I mean, the power of asking and listening is so critical. I mean, how many times do we go over that with each other and as reminders, as leaders, as people in the world? How many times do I have to relearn that same lesson, on the home front, with my wife? Like, maybe I should stop the doom loop inside my head, the mixtape of attribution, and actually just like, whoa, and just say, hey, I feel like something's kind of up here. is that right? Am I negatively interpreting this? I mean, that's another thing. I have heard it said that a simple framework of negative communication patterns could be withdrawal, escalation, negative interpretation, and invalidation, right? I know that for myself, I happen to be a bit of a negative interpreter and a bit of an escalator. And so I shouldn't say a bit of an escalator. I'm an escalator.
Recovering 10, as we like to say.
I'm a recovering 10, yes. A former sympathetic detonator, to use some breaching parlance. Anyways, I think that, a technique, a tactic that I have used frequently is to say, hey, I might be negatively interpreting this, but I feel like this is what I'm observing. Is that right? Or what are you seeing from your perspective? And that has helped me greatly in getting the conversation going, not only in the home front, but in the workplace as well. And I think that it's the power of trying to start the dialogue. And then maybe when we get the dialogue going, we can actually put our finger on the nature of the disruption. And I want to take the opportunity now to really, dig into this just a deeper level. I mentioned there are times when there can be disruptions of proficiency, or there can be disruptions of posture. And I want to linger on that. This is something that we have helped a lot of folks with, especially coupled with our difficult conversations framework, which is, okay, now I actually have the difficult conversation. But you've mentioned this, you've given us a great entrance into this process by being actually willing to have the conversation. Ask a question, listen, right? You're a human being. And there are a couple of kind of avatars that we have kind of come up with that have helped us to wrap our minds around what disruption we're dealing with. So there's disruptions of proficiency, and there's generally 3. I don't know why it always ends up being 3 with us, but it is. So it's just the way it goes.
It's a bias.
If you hang out with us, we can handle no more than 3. And it's the untrained. These are disruptions of proficiency: the untrained, the immature, and the out of position. These are 3 common themes that we find. Remind you, it's not fully exhaustive, but the untrained. Look, they lack the skills, they lack the knowledge, the know-how. They haven't been trained properly, or maybe they need to be retrained, right? I don't know about any of you guys, but whenever I've graduated a training course, whether it's been a sales academy or whether it's been a Pathfinder school, I could tell you right now that I still needed to do some refreshers and catch back, some of those fastballs that I didn't catch originally. So maybe it's a matter of training. The immature. This is, when we say this, we're not talking about, somebody's posture. We're talking about maybe they just need some more time in the role. Maybe they're just young in the seat. They're new at this. Hey, we've all been new before. That's an opportunity for us to really kind of give a little bit of grace and not run too hard in the paint on saying like, you're, a cancer on the team. I don't know. Maybe they're just learning how to be on the team. And then the final one is the out of position, wrong seat on the bus, right? Like you're a great player. You just happen to be playing in the wrong position, and we need to move you off of to a different position. Now, the other component that I'll mention is these disruptions of posture. Frankly, I think these avatars have more fun names, and I like to talk about them a lot. And the 3 avatars here are the obstinate, the absent, and the uncommitted. And I think this really is, when we talk about those people who could potentially be high performers, but they're kind of a cancer on the team or a jerk, you're really probably talking about someone that might fall within this disruption of posture perspective. And this is, the obstinate. These are the folks that dig their heels in. They're listening, but they're not hearing, right? They're constantly litigating guidance and all these kind of things. They're just obstinate, right? It's the child with their arms crossed. The absent, like, they're never to be found. Like, where are they at? Like, they're there's always a reason why they missed the meeting, or I got to step out because I'm getting a call right now, or there's always a reason. And in the end of the day, they're just absent. And those are the things that people really pick up on as well, right? Like, these are all things that people pick up on in that team dynamic. Imagine yourself in the team room, in the conference room. And then the uncommitted. These people already have one foot out the door. And I think that in leadership situations, if you haven't experienced this yet, you're going to have people who already have one foot out the door, or they're the ones that are looking while kind of performing, and they're kind of just not there. And, like, this is really where we really need to figure out, what am I dealing with here? So there may be a disruption. It's come up. Maybe it's a high performer, but there's some kind of behavior going on. But take Blayne's approach here, which is like, let's first talk about it and find out what is going on, and then maybe you can kind of disaggregate. Is this a disruption of posture, or is this a disruption of proficiency? And then maybe I can deal with it, because if it is a disruption of posture, those are really the ones that we really need to have that difficult conversation with, and just say, hey, look, like, this is the mission that we're on. This is the mission you signed up for. Or do you still want to be on this mission? Because here are some things that we're identifying that really just can't persist.
Yeah, that the proficiency versus posture thing, I think, is really important. And then kind of diving into what exactly is going on is a really good place to start. And maybe just, we've thrown kind of a lot out here. Maybe just to sort of summarize a little bit, I think our position on this is, if you've got someone on your team that, especially if they're a high performer, but they're disruptive or they're just kind of a jerk, number one, it's got to absolutely be addressed, and sooner than later. So I think that's really important. I think the second thing we're trying to say here is, whenever possible, address the disruption or the challenge or the issue, and don't just assign too much to the person at first. Like, engage with them in good faith and try to understand sort of what's going on. And maybe the third thing that I will layer onto this is, sometimes you're going to have to move some of these people out, because if you let that hang on too long, that cancer can become malignant, and it's going to depress the entire performance of the organization in favor of keeping this one person who's doing a good job in place. And the scales are gonna balance out of favor pretty quickly. I'll just tell you maybe one quick anecdote that I think highlights some of this, and I want to share, is that when I was a Special Forces Detachment Commander, I had to fire a team sergeant. So my senior NCO on the team, that's a vaunted position in the SF community. You don't mess with those folks. They got there for a reason. I had to fire one. And believe me, I did not want to do it. I didn't enjoy the process at all. But what ultimately did allow me to do it, as painful as it was, and as risky as it was for my own reputation, was the fact that I understood what we were doing as a team. I understood how it was affecting the team. And I approached that person, and here's the big thing. I genuinely wanted to give them every opportunity to be successful. I wasn't looking for a way to interpret every single behavior or make every black mark on the record I could in order to kind of build my case to get that person out. I was genuinely hopeful this person was going to be a better performer than my initial assessment indicated, and that maybe if I partnered with that person, we could get them up to a level of performance that would make the team feel good about it before we deployed over to Afghanistan. And it became very clear to me at one point that despite my effort, I was working harder to get this person's performance up than they were. And when you're on a team of only 12 people and you've got the kind of mission that an SF team has to do downrange, one person can't be a low performer, much less the team sergeant. And so I had to, go through the counseling sessions and get this stuff on paper and tell that person right to their face, hey, I don't think you're cut out for this job. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to try to move you off this team. And I had to go stand before the battalion sergeant major and make my case, which, by the way, as a lowly captain, they're going to point the finger right back at you and be like, well, what are you doing? And it was a painful, uncomfortable process. But at the end of the day, my chain of command supported me because it was the right decision. I think, more importantly, that person who I removed from the team ended up ultimately supporting me and our team once we got downrange, and just, I think, acknowledged eventually, hey, I wasn't in the kind of shape, prepared, proficient enough to be in that job. And we were still able to have a relationship even beyond that, even though it was very tumultuous for a short time. And so that's the hardest kind of firing that I've ever had to do. And it was the one that involved the most personal risk for me. And applying this, hey, we're teammates here. Let's see what we can do. Let's act in good faith. But then if it's not working out, we're going to have to move in this direction. That's just the reality of the situation sometimes, and it's what we sign up for as leaders. It's why we get paid the big bucks.
Blayne, that's an awesome anecdote. Thank you for sharing that. And no doubt that took an awful lot of guts to really lean into that in such a difficult situation. I think it cues up maybe another topic for another time, which is how do you exit people well? Because there's a good way to do it and there's a bad way to do it, and sometimes it just has to be done, and it just sucks, right? But I think the other thing that you really captured in that, which really can help us wrap this episode, is what you captured was the willingness to address an issue without feeling like you had the full determination or prediction of what the outcome was going to be. And I think that oftentimes we're reluctant to lean into it because we want to say, hey, I want to know where this is going to go, or I want to know what the outcome is. And I think your willingness to actually engage in the difficult conversation, to bring this disruption up to that team sergeant's perspective and say, what can we do to get you where you need to be? And can we work through this problem? I think that that's the kind of leadership that we need more of in this world, is the willingness to be prepared to enter into a difficult conversation, be prepared to do a little bit of exploration, be prepared to figure out how do we align on a way forward and see if we can't get where we're trying to go, and also be prepared to finally make the determination and exit if that is what needs to happen, because that quote unquote cancer on the team or disruption on the team, it just cannot persist. It cannot be allowed to persist if you really want to be the kind of team that is high performing and successful for the long haul. So I think that's a great way to wrap this session. Thanks again for listening out there. Hey, if you want to drop us a question, please do so at contact@appliedleadershippartners.com, and we would love to have you enter into the conversation. So signing off for now. We'll see you guys next time.